that's one of the things about religion that we have to remember when we're talking about that makes it such a hot topic issue is because we're talking about law. Who gets to be God? Who gets to be God's deputies? Who is the Most High? Who is the divine authority? It's all about the claim to the Most High. The only way that somebody can be higher than us is if we give away our power. Because there's nobody, we're all equal. But we're not equal in our knowledge, so ultimately I think it does have to be a hierarchy, but it has to be a cooperative hierarchy like a bee colony. It's about what our value system is, what we care about.
Greetings, Hive Mind. I am your host, Brandon Martin, and welcome to the 38th episode of the CubbyWhole podcast, where important topics are unveiled, discussed, and tested. Today is February 9th, 2020, and please make sure to check out all of our previous episodes and keep up to date with the CubbyWhole news at the CubbyWhole website. That's CubbyWhole.com. So today I will be continuing forward from my last solo episode, which was episode 37, moving progressively through the topics of the methods of manipulation. We have been covering a vast amount of knowledge when it comes to this, and I really hope everybody has found clarity and found use in this information. I would like to give a caveat that this is not all my information. This is information that has been researched and gathered by many individuals. My style and presentation, my style has been directly derived from one of my teachers, Mark Passio, but I take and pull from many different great researchers out there, just as he did and just as all of us should do. There is nothing wrong with using the tools to our advantage, and anybody who is truly a truth seeker and speaker should understand that we are all here to build with each other, and there's no way to escape talking about topics that other people have talked about. It is true that my style is very similar to his, and that is because I have found great value in his approach. I think it is one of the best ways to strategically approach initiating people into these topics. So you will find similarities between all of our work and the What on Earth is Happening community. With that being said, we have just finished with astrotheology under the category of religion. Now, I would personally like to spend a few more weeks going over astrotheology, and I will be opening that topic up in the future in more depth. But for these episodes, I felt that it is best to not get stuck on any particular topic and to continuously, progressively move through them so that we can move on through the series. Today we're going to be speaking about the subversive use of sacred symbolism. I would like to say that this is not going to be an in-depth academic or scholarly approach to the general influencing the media has over people's minds. And that media can be from Hollywood to your mainstream media, news channels, to social media. When I say media, I mean any type of content that's being produced by external sources at this point. The first thing I would like to say about the subversive use of sacred symbolism is, even though I am covering the negative sides of this, it is very important to understand to be very cautious and prudent about not marginalizing symbolism and never looking at it in a unidirectional form. Symbolism itself is dualistic. It is neither good nor evil in one scenario. It all depends upon the level of consciousness that is wielding that symbol and whether or not it is doing harm or violating natural law principles. Sacred symbolism is in fact something that we all should be attaining to understand. It is the highest of high when it comes to true, solid language that we can enhance our consciousness with. There is a reason why the ancients of antiquity would use a symbolic form to initiate people into the mysteries. One reason is because when we literalize everything, we get pushed into a left brain imbalance. Whereas when we are symbolically becoming literate, it enhances our holistic brain. It not only does it touch on the right brain, but also since we are intellectually breaking it down, we are combining both hemispheres. So this is about bringing in true intelligence to understanding symbolism. Symbolism is the language of the universe. And if you go back to the earlier episodes and listen to what I was talking about when it comes to cymatics and the Hermetic principles, we can understand how valuable symbolism really is. All of our languages are based off of symbolism. Everything that we share is based off of symbolism. The numerological digits that we use are symbolic in nature. The letters that we use are symbols. And since we now know that symbols are vibration in form, we can say that the root of a symbol is vibration. And all things are at some level vibrating, whether low vibration or high vibration. Symbolism is the language of the ancient mystery traditions. Not only that, it is the language of all of nature and the universe. The universe speaks in symbolic forms. Everybody is always asking for a sign, but they always ignore the symbolic representation of that sign. For every law and power active in the universal procedure is manifested to the limited sense perception of man through the medium of the symbol. Every form existing in the diversified sphere of being is symbolic of the divine activity by which it is produced. So, if we are looking for any evidence of higher power or a higher consciousness, however you want to look at that, then look no further than things like the fractal nature and Fibonacci sequences being developed through life forms. And look how orderly everything is. When we come to a direct understanding of this, we start to connect with our true spiritual nature and the one great spirit. It's interesting because a lot of scientists go into science to either disprove or prove the existence of God. And especially many quantum theorists and quantum scientists go in thinking that, okay, there's no way that I can prove this. And they come out being a firm advocate of knowing that there is an intelligent force underneath of nature. And that is very important to get to that level. Atheism is just another religion, and I personally should have added a section on atheism in the weapons of manipulation under the category of religion, because it is another cul-de-sac. But we will make a show about atheism in the future. By symbols, men have ever sought to communicate to each other those thoughts which transcend the limitation of verbal language. In a single figure, a symbol may both reveal and conceal, for to the wise the subject of the symbol is obvious, while so the ignorant the figure remains inscrutable. Rejecting man-conceived dialects as inadequate and unworthy to perpetuate divine ideas, the mysteries thus choose symbolism as a more ingenious and ideal method of preserving their transcendental knowledge. Hence, he who seeks to unveil the secret doctrine of antiquity must search for that doctrine not upon the open page of a book or of books, which might fall into the hands of the unworthy, but in the place where it was originally concealed. And now somebody might have an issue with me saying that somebody is unworthy in that paragraph. What I am specifically speaking of is those who would use the knowledge to advance their selfish means. People who will use the knowledge to invert it, to marginalize it, to pervert it, and to use it in dark ways against other people. Though I am egalitarian when it comes to this knowledge. Obviously, that's what this podcast is all about, sharing this knowledge. But there is a certain level of a hierarchical structure for initiation into the mysteries. We cannot just allow this information to be used in negative ways by dark people. Does this mean we conceal the information? No. It just means that we teach responsibility when it comes to this information. Of course, put it all out there on the table. But we also have to teach people responsibility, because it is people who have not dealt with the shadow work, who come in contact with this information, who are egotistically driven to use that information and these powers, these universal powers, to serve their own selfish means. I am not too concerned about a dark individual coming in contact with information like this. I think everybody should have access to all of this information. But I am concerned about whether or not we as light workers are teaching people true responsibility when it comes to it. One of the issues with the fall of the mystery traditions in the past was because a mob demanded for those secrets from the earlier light secret societies, the ones who were keeping it to preserve it for posterity and progeny, without ever learning how to handle the mysteries. Thus, now we have fragmented pieces of the mysteries that we have to bring back together because of this lack of real responsibility. It is only due to select few who actually held the mysteries intact that brought it down to us into our modern age. And I shouldn't say select few because they weren't selected, but the people who took it upon themselves, who actually cared enough to preserve that information in its purest form. And that's what we're trying to really do here at the CubbyWhole, is bring all this information back together. It is a puzzle. It is a sheet of glass that has been shattered. And we're trying to piece that back together so we can really see what we need to see very clearly. So as always, there are slides for this episode, and you can find them at the CubbyWhole podcast page. So please follow along with the slides for this episode. I'd like to start out with a really good quote here from Manly P. Hall, one of the most profound and amazing, intelligent occultists of our time. And I shouldn't even call him an occultist. He was really a de-occultist, one who reveals the secret mysteries. To live in the world without becoming aware of the meaning of the world is like wandering about in a great library without touching the books. It has always seemed to me that the symbolism should be restored to the structure of world education. The young are no longer invited to seek the hidden truths, dynamic and eternal, locked within the shape and behavior of living beings. So as he's pointing out here, our entire educational system has brought us into a left brain imbalance, focusing mainly on literacy through textual means and focusing on the lower mysteries is what I would call them. And what I mean by that is mysteries that are in the solar doctrine that do not enhance our evolution. Symbols, if used properly, enhance our evolution, but they also can de-evolve our consciousness if not handled properly or if used against individuals. We know through things like MK Ultra, we can use repetitive types of symbolic means under certain strict scenarios to influence people who are weak-minded or are in a vulnerable mental state. Thus, sometimes they put them in a vulnerable mental state to make sure that the programming is more well received to the consciousness and to make sure that the program is inscribed in the brain and in the neural pathways. It's very interesting because our brain itself does not preserve the information in a lingual fashion. It preserves it in pictograms and images. So our brain itself is a symbolic mechanism, a symbolic interpreting mechanism. It only preserves information in symbolic forms. Everything else is derived from those symbolic forms. It is very interesting when people start to talk negatively against symbolism, especially left brain eggheads, right? Because they fail to even recognize that while they are talking down against symbolists or symbolism, they not only are using symbols to communicate that, because their words are symbols as well, just a lesser form of the pure form symbols. They are using symbols to communicate that to whoever, but they also use symbols in things like mathematics to understand complex equations. They themselves, at some level, are symbolists, but our educational system doesn't teach us about the innate essence of what symbols actually are. All symbols have within them a remaining symbolness or essence that does not change, even though the outer shell of that form may change. So one could say that the outer shell of the symbol may alter, but its root essence stays the same throughout all eternity. This gets into a little bit of philosophy, such as the questions about the ontological self and whether or not, if we continue to change our physical appearances through augmentation, would we still have an essential self after we've exchanged all of our components. This is known as the Theseus ship philosophy, where if you have a ship and you start to replace all the boards on that wooden ship, at what point is that ship no longer the same ship? Is it 10% of the boards being replaced? Would it still be considered to be the same ship? Or is it 100%? Or is there a shipness that continues to remain there, an innate property of that ship that no matter how many boards you change, it will always have that remaining essence to it? And this is a metaphysical concept because it gets into whether or not we have a soul or something that remains beyond the physical. And I say yes, there is always a sharedness between all things that have a innate essence, that no matter if you continue to change the outward appearance, the root causal cause of that thing remains the same. To give further context about the nature of symbolism, Manly P. Hall states, "The nature about us uses the language of symbolism. For the unfoldment of the potential of all its creations, the mysteries of life do not explain themselves or issue any dogmatic statements about their ways or workings." So to fully grasp subversive symbolism, we must first understand archetypal language, or what I have termed archetype semiotics. Semiotics is simply the study of symbolism. So on the next slide, I have 5 basic archetype symbols with their meanings below them. But what is an archetype? Well, an archetype is an original pattern or model from which all things of the same kind are copied or on which they are based. It is a model or first form, or we could also call it a prototype. These are archaic remnants or primordial images which have been constantly criticized by people who lack the sufficient knowledge of psychology, anthropology, and mythology. One part of the confusion is that the form that the archetype represents can greatly vary in detail without losing its base essence and underlying meaning. What I mean by that is, even though the outer form may change or vary in degrees and details, the underlying essence of that symbol remains intact. It will eternally be carried down through history and existence. So let's take a look at these basic archetypal forms. A circle can be associated to eternity, wholeness, perfection, fluidity, completeness, divinity. It also can be associated to things like a womb or feminine characteristics, so it is a feminine symbol because of its curves. And remember, this is just the basics of how much knowledge is preserved in these symbols. So one thing I can mention here is that the simpler the symbol, the more knowledge that can be stored within it. So you might find a whole library's worth of knowledge in a very simple, rudimentary symbol. As those simple symbols are layered with each other, or connected with each other and used together, then you can really start to see how much knowledge is put into something like a sigil. So a square, it represents stability, rigidity, grounded, imperfect, base, earthly. It also can be a symbol of the body and a masculine archetype. The triangle represents balance, synthesis, union, sharpness, intellect, fiery. This also can be associated to a masculine component because of its upward-facing, phallic-like symbolic representation. The star represents spirit, sovereignty, achievement, openness, oneness, light. And this is a pentagonal star, which represents the 5 elements, earth, air, water, and fire, plus the divine element of spirit at the top, properly placed. We see stars all over the place to represent sovereignty. The stars are looked at as souls or spirits of the sky. We often have in many ideas of after death concepts where we think souls become the stars of the heavens. The cross, which I explained in astrotheology quite well, being the cross of the zodiac or the Christian cross. Well, here it basically represents power, authority, strength, focus, and will. Just think about it. We have cross arrows that we use to focus with, to find our target, the pinpoint between the 2 lines. So this is the basics of the archetypal language. And as you start to dig further and deeper into the understanding of symbolism, and as you bring more knowledge back to the symbol, it will unveil more to you. So at one point you may only discover so much from it because of how big your consciousness is or how much knowledge that you have at that point. But if you come back to that symbol over and over, it will continue to reveal more things to you as you advance spiritually and as your level of consciousness increases. So archetypes can be described as a blueprint of our psyche and the universe. As stated in the first Hermetic principle, that all is mind. The mind is everything. The mind has base patterns which it uses as building blocks or forms to create reality. These are innately structured into the fabric of reality and into our psyche. One could call these thought forms that influence the feeling, thoughts, and actions of individuals, which are an emergent property from the archaic images of the ideas that are derived from the universal or collective unconsciousness. The archetypal language is the base primary patterns of being and becoming that have their roots in the first forms of involution and evolution residing at the very edge of formlessness itself. This is why it's so difficult for people to understand archetypes, and I would recommend studying Jungian psychology to really get a deep grip over what archetypal images are. But dealing with symbols, you're dealing with the right brain aspect, and they are very abstract concepts, and you have to have a high level of correlative thinking, which I'm about to explain. So it's kind of like floating in space where you have no tether or have nothing to anchor you to when you start to deal with these types of abstract concepts. This is why you must bring in the left brain to unify this and to tether yourself to a groundedness so that you can start to intellectually discover what these symbols actually mean. It is very important to have correlative thinking. So on the next slide, it's called correlative thinking. And to really get a full understanding of symbols, we have to have symbolic literacy. Symbolic literacy is one of the most important processes on the journey to self-awareness. The development of correlative thinking is a requirement for the study and understanding of symbolism. Unfortunately, this is one of the most lacking aspects of people's psyches in the modern world. Because of our modern education, we are pushed into a left brain mentality and rigid skepticism against any type of symbolic understanding. So for example here, if I establish that book equals 20, and then I lay out the equation, dog plus cloud equals 50, and dog equals book, then what does cloud equal? Well, it's very easy to see that through correlative thinking and deductive processes, we can see that since book equals 20 and dog is the equivalent of book, then cloud must equal 30 to get to the end result of 50. The majority of people would not be able to provide the answer for the value of the cloud or even explain why it is so. The widespread absence of symbolic literacy and correlative thinking has left people defenseless against those who have the knowledge of symbols and archetypes. It has made it dramatically easier for the dark occultists to manipulate people's behavior through subconscious programming. In Exodus 24, "Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth below, or that is in the water underneath the earth." We've heard this many times, and in the commandments, actually comes before "thou shalt not kill." So this was really important to religious individuals. But yet, what do we find all over the world? We find these images everywhere, these motifs, not only of heaven, but also of hell. We find them in every cathedral. We find them in books all over the place. A bit of hypocrisy there, I would say. But what this really was about was making sure that people did not learn the language of the mysteries. That's what this idea is intended for. It is dark sorcery to make sure that people fear putting symbolic representations on their knowledge. It is a limitation of art and creativity. It is a limitation over the sacred mysteries. It is literally a binding idea that thwarts the ability to evolve consciousness. This is some of the dark religious aspects that we have running amok in the world and has been running amok for many, many centuries. When it comes to subversive use of symbolism, we can look no further than things like propaganda. Propaganda is a great way to influence people into certain behaviors or certain mindsets so that they behave in certain ways by repetitively programming their subconscious mind. And look around us today, it is everywhere. We are completely saturated and flooded with propaganda every single day. From your average TV commercials to all of the corporate signs that we see throughout the world. Look no further than the Nazi minister of propaganda, Joseph Goebbels, to understand this. He says, "This is the secret of propaganda. Those who are to be persuaded by it should be completely immersed in the ideas of the propaganda without ever noticing that they are being immersed in it." So it is about being secretive and covert to get people to normalize the propaganda. And I would say that they have done an amazing job at this. And if we look to Edward Bernays, the author of Propaganda, the book, he says, "If we understand the mechanisms and motives of the group mind, it is now possible to control and regiment the masses according to our will without their knowing it in almost every act of our daily lives, whether it is the sphere of politics or business, in our social conduct or our ethical thinking. We are dominated by the relatively small number of persons who understand the mental processes and social patterns of the masses. It is they who pull the wires which control the public mind." This is the dark cabal that has been running our world for centuries. They understand human psychology at such an advanced level compared to your average Joe that you run into at your local convenience store. And because they understand human psychology at this level, they are able to manipulate people because of that power differential in knowledge. That's why everybody needs to study psychology, especially the ancient psychology, because that's what we're really talking about when we're talking about symbols. Our psyche is filled with archetypal symbolism that we must decode. It is only through the symbolic nature that we can raise ourselves into understanding the workings of our psychology. Modern psychology has failed at this, and one reason I believe is because they lack the mystery traditions and the mystery methodologies for understanding the human psyche. Look around everywhere, whether it's at your local store, on your television, on your cell phone. You will find subversive use of the sacred symbols of the ancient world being intentionally manipulated to propagandize certain products so that people may profit upon your ignorance or upon our ignorance of these sacred symbols and the way that they have an effect on our psyche. Corporations know this all too well, and you can be trained in this type of manipulation in college. It's called advertisement. Everybody thinks it's a normal thing. And yes, at some levels, some forms of advertisement are fine. But when it is used to create more dichotomy between the rich and poor, more inequality between people, rather than uplifting their spiritual nature, then it is what I would call a perverted use of the sacred symbolism, or subversive use, to subvert the intentional and uplifting use of these symbols. There's a great book by Joel Bakan, who wrote the book The Corporation, The Pathological Pursuit of Profit and Power. And if you're following along with the slides, there is a slide for each of these quotes and some of the things that I'm mentioning. He says human psychopaths are notorious for their ability to use charm as a mask to hide their dangerously self-obsessed personalities. For corporations, social responsibility may play the same role. Through it, they can present themselves as compassionate and concerned about others, when in fact, they lack the ability to care about anyone or anything but themselves. Their ultimate purpose is self-preservation. It is not about the little man. It is not about raising up the little man into a higher state of consciousness. So what he's saying here is that the way corporations are being used today is in itself psychopathic, because it is being completely directed by these psychopathic individuals, which their only purpose is self-preservation and profit. They want more power, and they want to make sure to keep people at a low level of knowledge and to keep influencing people through their subconscious minds by imprinting symbols into their mind. All the sorcerer wants to do is to give you his mindset. They want to plant certain motifs and images into the mind so that you behave in a certain way. I mean, ask yourself, are your likes even your own? How do you know that your likes are not implanted by society or social constructs, and more specifically by the social engineers of our day? Ask yourself these deep questions. Where do my likes come from? Do I really like them, or was I conditioned into liking them? You will find more often than not, a lot of the music that you like, a lot of the TV shows that we like and watch have been planted there. I cannot think of a better example to give than the Betty Crocker incident for subversive symbolism. During the early 50s, Edward Bernays, the nephew of Sigmund Freud, influenced the propaganda campaigns with a perverted form of Freud's psychoanalytic ideas. The CIA noticed the great benefits of social conditioning and adapted this approach for the purpose of mass control over the population. One of the main places where it proved to be extremely useful was the modern consumer, especially the unassuming kitchen of the middle-class families. Around this time, Betty Crocker Foods had produced an instant cake mix. All you needed to do was add water to the powdered cake mix. At this time, this was seen and considered somewhat of a magical remedy to a lot of the hard work of the normal procedures for making cakes. Contrary to the intentions of Betty Crocker, the magical cake mix did not sell well. They actually lost millions of dollars over this. Betty Crocker Foods turned to the science of psychoanalysis to help solve the problem, or in other words, to subversively influence people with archetypal symbolism to buy something that the company already knew the average consumer did not want. So Crocker proceeded to hire a Madison Avenue ad campaign firm to investigate through psychoanalysis the underlying issue, quote-unquote issue, with why their mix was not selling, specifically directing the psychoanalysis at the modern housewives, knowing that they are the biggest consumers of most kitchen products. The final conclusion of the study was that even though the modern housewife was intrigued and, at some level, appreciated the convenience of the cake mix, they deeply felt guilty about deceiving their loved ones into thinking they had worked hard to produce the cake, considering that they had done very little work and put in little effort of herself and her own love into the procedure of the cake. So what I'm saying here is that they felt like they weren't contributing. They felt like it was an easy way out, and this was subconsciously as well. They didn't feel like they were actually providing the hard work and putting in the love to earn that respect from their family. Betty Crocker was given an answer by the psychologist that they had hired, which was quite simple. They informed Betty Crocker that all they needed to do to fix the problem was for them to add 3 words onto the instructions of the cake box. And you know what those 3 words were? Add 1 egg. One may be wondering why this was the answer given by the psychologist. It is because of its archetypal meaning and how it associates to the properties and aspects of our mind and our behaviors. The egg has been one of the most important ancient archetypal symbols. It directly invokes aspects of our subconscious that correspond to life, birth, creation, making the entire process of making the cake more meaningful in the common housewife's mind. In this way, the housewife would be giving life to her husband and family by proxy. So, since they provide the egg in the birthing process, this is subconsciously and symbolically associating this birthing process and contribution to creation into the kitchen and into the production of the food in the kitchen. It's a nurturing principle. The result of changing the recipe in the market offered a subconscious influencing over the housewife's mind to give them a way out. Now they thought they were doing more than just adding water. By adding an egg, they had associated the idea of life-giving and the creative properties and capabilities into the mix, which could relinquish the guilt felt by the housewife. To say the least, after this point, the sales of Betty Crocker's unwanted cake mix soared. And you wonder why. This is how subversive advertisement works, people. So keep this in mind as we go further with some of the correlations that I will be bringing up when it comes to the symbolism. And keep this in mind in your everyday shopping. So now we're on the slide of solar symbolism. So I'm going to give the meaning of these symbols, these archetypal forms. I'm going to give a very beginner level interpretation of these symbols for people, and then I'm going to show how they're being used in advertisement. So we have solar symbolism. Now, we know very readily, at least I hope most people know, that the falcon, or lots of birds as well, have been symbolized as the sun, specifically in the ancient Egyptian time. But the sun can be looked at as light, life force, life essence, spirit, knowledge, power, enlightenment, growth, strength, kingship, sovereignty, trust, charity, renewal, resurrection. This is all because of a thing that I call grounds of likeness. This is being corresponded to the likeness and the properties of the sun and our symbolic correlation to things such as resurrection, because the sun is seemingly resurrected every day in the morning in the east. It is symbolic of light because it brings in light, obviously. So it's symbolic based upon its pragmatic functions. It's symbolic of life because it is seen as the life giver to all the plants here, and that we wouldn't have life without the sun. So it's also about the life force or life essence. So we could call it symbolism of the soul as well, the spirit. It's about knowledge because it's about becoming conscious or aware. It's about power because it has very powerful properties. It's about enlightenment because it's about bringing the light into the mind. It's about raising the light up to its highest aspect. And on the next slide, we see the sun being used in many different ways. We have the Lucius trust symbol with the sun. We have Lucus arts. And remember that Latin word for Luc means light. It literally means the light. And if you look above the individual's head in the image of Lucas arts, you can see the rays of the sun, and he's yellow. We have natural light, the beer. We have sun microsystems, and if you look real close, you might be able to see swastikas in that, but obviously it's a play on the word sun as well. If you look close enough, you'll see sun in a very cryptic fashion. We have sun trust with the rays of the sun. We have Shell, the gas company, which has a seashell, but also it has the sun coming up over the horizon. So this is multifaceted symbolism. We have Gulf, which is a big orange sun. Folgers, using the sun between the two mountains, the two peaks, the twin peaks, the two pillars. We have disc over, which is also discover. Okay, so disc over, meaning the sun that goes over, the disk that flies overhead. We have Dole with the sun in the middle of the O. We have the BP symbol, which is a sun symbol. We have Sunoco, which is the Sunco, with the arrow being shot through the sun. We have Days In, with the sun over the horizon again. So all you need to do is go to your local store and start looking at advertisement, and you'll see that they are associating through symbolic means these ideas of light, of renewal, of resurrection, of knowledge, of comfort, of warmth, the properties that the sun has. So they're trying to subversively, by proxy, get you to think that that's what you will get when you buy or use these services. That's one of the main reasons that this is so attractive to people, because we associate it to the sun and it becomes attracted to us. So like Sun Trust, a banking institution, a banking service, which they're trying to say that you can trust them because they are like the sun. They will always come up. Even though they go down, they'll always come back and always save you. They're the sun saviors, So they're associating that with trust. The credit card company, Discover. And that's some real interesting green language there, because they're trying to tell you that they are the sun, that you can trust them like you can trust the sun. For food companies, they're trying to associate it with sun because it's a life-giving force. They're trying to say that you are going to get healthy food and healthy nutrition from this product. The next slide is lunar symbolism. Now I broke lunar symbolism down into two different types of birds, the dove and the owl. We spoke upon the owl a little bit, but we haven't really spoken upon the dove too much. We did speak upon it in astrotheology briefly with the Holy Spirit. But here we have the dove, which its interpretation is knowledge or veritas, which means truth, intelligence, pure, openness, love, sharing, day, and light. In contrast to this, we have the owl, which is also knowledge, intelligence, insight, secrecy, predation, night, and darkness. Keep these two in mind as we move forward. So the dove is the moon in the day sky. This is symbolic because the moon looks like a dove flying through the day sky, a white, object that shares the sky with the sun. This correlates back to our astrotheological symbol of the holy union between the sacred masculine and sacred feminine principles when it comes to the celestial movements. When the dove or the moon is in the day sky, there is a holy wedding taking place between the sun and the moon because they share the same area. But it is never seen in its full aspect in the day sky. It is always translucent or blurry and foggy, where you can only see partial of it. Every once in a while you do see its full aspect, but not very often. It is very, very rare. As we can see here, a lot more corporate symbolism being used. We have the Visa card with the dove above it. We have the White Dove Entertainment Company. We have the Holy Spirit in Christianity. We have the Green Dove Company. We have Dove, the shampoo and soap company. We have that wedding symbolism with the two individuals holding the doves. We see this as a rite in weddings a lot. We have the White Dove Society. We have the white dove being used for the World Peace Organization. The white dove is about purity. So what they're trying to associate here is that they are pure, they're trustworthy, they have knowledge, similar to the association with the sun. So what about the moon and the night sky? That's associated with the owl. Well, look no further than the Bohemian Grove ritual to find the use of the owl symbolism. And all you have to do is go back to my earlier episode to understand some of this when it comes to the cult of Minerva and the owl. But they have their ritual in front of the giant owl, as you can see in these pictures. You have the book, The Birds of the Bohemian Grove, with the owls on this. You have the little vector icon that says "We never sleep," the owl. That's some dark symbolism there. We also have the bird that's a teacher. Now remember, I told you that the owl becomes the guardian of the sacred knowledge. That's why the secret societies use it as their symbol. That's one reason why. Many other reasons include the fact that it is a predatory bird. We have Hooters. Obviously, that's pretty blatant about what that's about. We have Minerva Medica. There you go, folks. Minerva Medica with the owl in the tree. We have Guardian Insurance. There you go, the guardian. The owl is the guardian. If you look to the far left, we have the symbol of the Bohemian Club. And what it says is "Weaving spiders come not here," with the owl in the middle of it. And if you look at the car symbol, that's, I believe, a Mazda. Well, that's an owl. That's a face of an owl. We also have ancient currency that's used with owls on it. If you go to the next slide, you'll see the cartoon Sailor Moon, which has to do with that lunar symbolism. DreamWorks, the film company. We have currency that has the owl on it. We have Moon Express. The moon is me, it says. We have the MasterCard and other credit cards that use the overlapping of the moon and the sun. We have many flags that correlate to the lunar symbolism. Now, the star is seen to be Venus in a lot of these flags. So there is a correlation here to Venus because it's never seen in its full aspect either. It's always seen in a crescent form. But obviously this is lunar symbolism, to me at least. And look no further than Washington, D.C. at the geomancy that takes place there, with the streets around the sacred temple of government that are laid out as an owl, right? I mean, look at that. That cannot be any more blatant that these dark occultists are controlling everything. I mean, you have these buildings as well. The one on the left looks like two owls standing beside each other, or perched beside each other. And then the other one looks like an owl. Giant owl, that is. So these buildings are directly structured and designed to look like owls. The streets are designed to look like owls. I mean, it is everywhere, folks. It is hidden in plain sight. Moving on to the next slide, we have Saturn and the black sun symbolism. Okay? So if we look to things like DirecTV, you have the rings of Saturn. That's what we're looking for here. We're looking for a celestial object, a spherical object, or a crescent object with a ring around it. So you have DirecTV with its ring. You have Internet Explorer. Now, you could look at the E as the Earth and then the ring around it being like a satellite, but it also represents the rings of Saturn. We have Nissan, the car company. Now, when it comes to vehicles, a lot of vehicles are correlated with celestial objects. This is because of their association with movement. So if you just look at a lot of the names of vehicles, you'll find that they are correlated to astrotheological concepts. You have the Nike check, which is the rings of Saturn. You have Burger King, which is the rings of Saturn. You have the car Saturn. You have Sega Saturn. You have AAA. You have Boeing. This is all about associating these things to these celestial objects and their properties and these psychological traits that come from them. And what happens when we are being influenced by these celestial objects or being influenced by these symbols. And by the way, the cult of the black sun symbolism, or the Saturn symbolism, its meanings can be interpreted as things that have to do with time, distance, control, boundaries, binding, things that have to do with darkness, the complete obscuring of the light, of knowledge, things that are hidden. So it's about ignorance, it's about darkness. And obviously these are just the dark aspects. There are positive aspects to a lot of these symbols as well. It has to do with the shadow self. That's another thing that Saturnian symbolism has to do with, is the shadow self. And just ask yourself, when it comes to all these symbols, are these at all enlightening our species? Are these at all enhancing our spiritual development and our evolution in consciousness? Well, I would say no. For the vast majority of them, they are being used to subvert our consciousness, to restrict our ability to evolve. So moving on to the next slide, and this is probably the last one I'll have time for today. This is pyramid and the all-seeing eye symbolism. And the most blatant one of this is the seal on the dollar bill. And there's a lot to this seal. There's a lot of hidden information in this seal, and I look forward to breaking this down in the future. So if we look to many companies, yet again, we're going to find the pyramid and the all-seeing eye all over the place. You have Fidelity Investments, right? And you have the pyramid with the all-seeing eye there. You have Citgo, which is a pyramid. You have PBS with the all-seeing eye. You know, like they didn't put it right in front of our faces. You have the British Intelligence Service, the MI5, or now the MI6, with the royal crown in the middle of a pyramid. You have Sprint Business with a mirrored pyramid. Acadia Insurance. Now you can see how all these companies are using this symbolism to associate the meanings behind these forms. And just so people understand, the pyramid is associated with spirit. It is about balance. It is about an upward facing pyramid is about thrusting, piercing. It also correlates to the intellect. It's also a symbol. It's also an alchemical symbol of fire, the fire of the mind. So there's many ways we can break down this symbol. And I'm sorry I didn't give a slide with the meanings behind the Saturnian and the pyramid symbolism. I just didn't have time to get all that done. But it's about time that people who are listening to me to go and do some of their own research at this point as well. I mean, you have the Nickelodeon shows. I mean, it's insane what Nickelodeon and Disney has shown throughout the years. Just go back to their older stuff and you will see all kinds of blatant symbolism all over the place. And a lot of dark, perverted stuff if you really open your mind and look at it. I mean, you have Adidas with the 3 pyramids. You have the Vulcan Stone. Now, this one is something I talk about quite a bit. You have the pyramid in the middle of the stone, and the Vulcan Stone is the Philosopher's Stone because it was forged by Vulcanus, or Vulcanus. He's the alchemist. He's the first blacksmith. And he forges the stone. He's an artisan. He's a crafter. He's a mason. And that's what they're associating with this. The third eye, the Vulcan Stone, the Philosopher's Stone. You have AOL with the pyramid. You have Christianity with the pyramid and the all-seeing eye right in the back. You have religious institutions that are using these symbols all over the place. I mean, look at this guy with the pyramid right over his head in the back and the all-seeing eye. You have the glasses company, Electric, with the eye in the middle of the pyramid that has the electric sign, which is Kabbalistic, the middle path. It also has to do with El, God. You have the graphics card company, Nvidia, with the all-seeing eye being used. And you can tell this is about sight. It's associating all these things to sight, being able to see, but it's also associating them to spiritual sight. You have air walk. Think about that, air walk, walking in the air, light as air, So there's a lot to all this symbolism. But that's all we have time for this episode of the CubbyWhole podcast. In the next episode, me and Nathan will be further explaining subversive use of symbolism. Like always, I hope you guys have found some clarity in this show today. And you can find all of our previous shows, which I highly recommend that you go back and chronologically work through the shows so that you can build the tapestry that we are trying to unveil here to keep up with, the lessons that we are giving here. So please go to the CubbyWhole website to find our presentations, news, and other content. That's CubbyWhole.com. And make sure to keep doing your due diligence into studying the occult and esoteric workings of the world and yourself, because we need to become more enlightened about these things. We need to unveil the mystery traditions and bring them back into a methodology of modern education. Keep your eyes open for our future shows as we go further into mind control. And new shows come out every Monday at 12 p.m. Pacific time. Stay tuned for more. Thank you very much and keep transcending dogma.